Which mythical creature monster would you be the least surprised to discover is real? Story 1. The Kraken. It was likely just a very big squid that some people saw. Edit. Jesus Christ, that's a lot of upvotes. My poor notifications box. Story 2. Shirala or Raul, creature from Turkish mythology that is a hairy forest demon that lured children into the bushes and tickles them to passing. Pretty sure we have those all over the world, and we just call them pedophiles. Story 3. Literally anything in the ocean. We have no idea what's out there. Edit. Wow. TBH. I just started Redditing, so Tism for the upvotes. Also, the stuff we've discovered already is hella terrifying. Look up a goblin shark. I can even look at it without freezing up. Answer came to say this. Water covers 70% of the Earth, is incredibly deep in certain areas, and we've explored a fraction of it, the majority in relatively shallow waters. Yes, we have done deep-sea exploration, but it's technically difficult and very expensive. I would guess there's hundreds of creatures in the oceans that we have absolutely no idea exist, much less the ones we think might be there. We've only recently captured video of live giant squid, although we've known of their existence for centuries, and that's because they sometime wash ashore dead. What else is down there that never emerges from the deep? Story 4. A unicorn. It's just a horse with a horn. I find them to be more believable than an 18-foot tall, four-legged spotted creature with a long tongue. Answer. So I just learned this a bit back. Unicorns may actually be rhinos. From what I remember, hippos were described as means river horse. So when Romans, I think, ran into rhinos, they called them one-horned river horses, most likely due to their similar build. And then, as the telephone game goes along, the river part gets dropped, and we have a one-horned horse. So yes, unicorns might actually exist, lol. Story 5. Dragons, man. I find it fascinating that so many cultures have some sort of dragon mythology and artwork, yet they don't seem to exist. Seems suspicious. Answer. The likely reason being that people found dinosaur bones because they are all over the world, obviously. Ancient humans trying to make logic of the massive bones and seeing the skulls, etc. This also applies to giants. If you look at Chinese dragons that could have come from a brontosaurus-type dinosaur's head and neck being found, which I believe were in the area. Story 6. Chupacabra. They already have some basis in reality, coyotes with mange, so it was real, I'd probably not care. Answer. I've seen the chupacabra. My mother and I were watching the sunrise somewhere in the Texas countryside. We were sitting quietly when we saw this stealthy, long-snouted half-dog, half-armadillo slink into the yard. It crept up on a bunny rabbit that was chilling doing bunny rabbit things, and the rabbit finally took notice and tried to run. This thing snatched it up faster than lightning and disappeared back the way it had come with its fresh eliminate. I remember the jackrabbit corpse, I call them bunnies BC I live dangerously, was larger than the thing carrying it, and it was like nothing either of us had ever seen. Story 7. I think the orang panda is real. It could be a surviving human species or an undiscovered relative of the orangutan. Both are exciting to consider. We know that Indonesia is a hothouse of hominid evolution, so it really isn't that far-fetched. Story 8. Mermaids, but in an odd form, not the gorgeous half-female, half-dolphin tail myth, but more of a hybrid species of two fish conjoined together that we haven't yet discovered yet. Story 9. Vampires. Nothing too magical and wondrous, but humanoids that live by consuming the lives of other humans? Well, we've already got politicians. It's not too far to assume that these egregiously wealthy people could be immortal and just go hibernate for a couple of centuries when their popularity plummets a bit too much. Answer: vampires is what I'd say too. Even the more mystical type. I just don't find it hard to believe that if there's some immortal and powerful being that they could manage to hide themselves. Having wealth and connections would be easy with centuries of life to work with, especially if you're working with others of your kind who also have a bunch of wealth and influence. Even easier if you have actual magical powers to assist you. Of course, it seems very unlikely for these things to be really real, but there's part of me that almost is willing to believe it. Story 10. Unicorn. It's just a horse with a horn. We already have moose and deer and narwhal. A horse with a horn isn't that outrageous. Story 11. Don't think anyone has mentioned Titanoboa, yet honestly, with how massive those South American rainforests are and how most of it is unexplored, I wouldn't be surprised if there's one lurking in those forests. Story 12. I don't believe in ghosts, but I have to think there's something to ghosts. Some echo or shadow of a person's energy or some shoot like that. X200B. I don't know, man. I wanted to say giant squids, but a bunch of people already said that. Answer: this is one of those things about which that I have like cognitive dissonance. The more I want to say rational side of me says, no way, it doesn't make sense. Why can't we capture any harder kind of evidence of them if they're apparently so common? Why only sometimes are there ghosts? Why some people and not others? It can't always just be traumatic deaths or something, because there's still tons of those. On the other hand, it doesn't feel right to deny what I have personally seen with my own eyes. That would mean I just totally made it up to myself, for no reason, and my brain just decided to experience it just because, which isn't impossible, of course, but still. Story 13. In some sense, I think unicorns are real. Hear me out. First, some Greek lessons. In Greek, a unicorn is called monokeros, single horn, similar to rhinoceros, nose horn. Also, a horse was called hippos, and hippopotamos literally means river horse. My theory is ancient Greeks discovered hippopotamus in Egypt and named them river horses. Later, someone saw rhinos further south and described them looking like a river horse but with a horn on its head. This at some point got lost in translation, and people back in Europe, who had never seen a rhinoceros nor a hippopotamus, thought of the monokeros as looking more horse-like. Hence the fantasy animal we know today. TLDR. Some ancient Greek tried to describe a rhinoceros to people who had never seen one, but they imagined a unicorn instead. Story 14. If I had to bet money, I would probably go with the Kraken or the Meg, which are just oversized versions of things we already know exist or existed. With modern technology, though, if something that big existed, we would absolutely know about it. Story 15. Anything in the sea or a unicorn. I mean, we already have rhinos and narwhals, and we have no idea what could be under the sea. Story 16. If we're putting cryptids on this Bigfoot, sightings have been described in numerous parts of the world for centuries. Story 17. Loch Ness Monster. When I was in Scotland, they told us about the history of the loch and all the scary saint that is there. Basically, when it was cut off from the ocean, a lot of those animals were trapped there and evolved into some nightmare fishes. Wouldn't be surprised if Nessie was there, trolling us all. Story 18. Ghosts. There's just something very reasonable about someone's essence not really passing away and either getting stuck into loops or just being lost between realms. There's tons of theories about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if we one day got some sort of proof they are real. Story 19. As odd as it is to say Wendigos, I usually dig into lore and mythology, so I find myself questioning the existence of certain creatures. Also, it may be a Native American thing for me, though I know of them through media like Until Dawn and that one, slightly inaccurate episode of Charmed. I feel like they might exist based on what I learned about them. They mostly stay in harsh cold climates up north like Canada and the northern parts of the United States, so the South has nothing to worry about. They're also weak to fire, which was something that Charmed got right. What's even more interesting is how someone can turn into one. Turns out the lore behind them often turning through eating the corpse of the dead is slightly true. But there are other means in which transformation is possible. We only really know of the cannibalism because of Until Dawn. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Wendigos were popping out up north. Story 20. So it would not surprise me if some variation of the Fae were real. Here is why they both exist traits that would make sense for a fifth-dimensional being, and their legends also could function if there were naturally occurring wormholes. Now it is unlikely but possible, as there are two possible explanations. Also, certain disorders are their real origins, autism, for some of the behaviors, for example. Story 21. Unicorns, horses with a horn. Why not? I'm not saying magical powers and all that, but we have deer, goats, moose, ect. Pretty sure a horse could have a birth defect causing it to grow a horn. Even some people have grown horns. Story 22. The Fae. I think David Bowie was the real deal. Also explains why some people have natural draw to them. Story 23. Considering 99.9% of all living creatures on Earth are extinct, and only about 1% of extinct creatures became fossils, I have decided to accept that all creatures that have been written about or described by multiple sources truly existed at some point. Now, whether a giant catfish causes earthquakes or a giant fire snake created volcanoes is entirely different. But who is to say that in 1,000 years, people aren't going to be calling giraffes or platypus mythical if none are fossilized, and all they have to go on is stories from the past? Because a creature with a 7-foot neck, or a mammal that lays eggs sounds as far out there as a horse with a horn or a fire-breathing, flying reptile. Story 24. Honestly, unicorns. Not all magical and poops rainbows or anything, but a horse with a horn on its head like a rhino? I mean, they're both ungulates, so it's not out of the realm of something that could have evolved if there was a pressure towards horns on horses. Story 25. Sea serpents. It's believed that the idea of sea serpents came about from sailors seeing oarfish and describing them as snake-like creatures, though it's still cool to imagine that there's a serpentine monster hundreds of feet long still lurking in the ocean depths to this day. Story 26. Cthulhu, or at least some massive octopus similar to it. A lot of the sea hasn't been explored, and I reckon there's some scary shoot down there we haven't found yet. Story 27. Ocean creatures. The ocean is absolutely terrifying and holds all types of mysteries we'll never be able to solve. We know more about the planets near us than our own fudge ocean. Story 28. A kid, Nessie, or any of the lake monsters. Now, I know it's not really feasible simply because they would be seen all the time coming up for air. Most sighting are either misidentified waves, other animals, or logs. I guess some version of Bigfoot could still be a possibility. Story 29. I guess I don't expect them to find whatever is responsible for Bigfoot and related sightings, but I don't think I would be surprised if they did. Story 30. Unicorns. I mean, they're literally just a horse with a horn. There are weirder animals that actually exist. Story 31. Honestly, unicorns, they just make a lot of fudge sense. A horse that can stab something. Look at some of the crazy jerk animals on this planet and tell me that a shank horse doesn't make more sense than some of them. Story 32. God. It's the only thing that I don't believe on a day-to-day level, but if it was proven real, I'd be all like, ha, I knew someone was fudge with me the whole time. Story 33. Elves other creatures like that. All the stuff that happens in the Elder Scrolls games happens on a different planet. I like to think reality is like that as well. While we're here doing our thing, there are elvish other types of humanoids out there doing their thing on their own planets. Maybe ancient humanity had encounters with these beings in the past. And that's where the inspiration for these creatures came from in the first place. Story 34. The Alma. We found one. They DNA tested her son. Turns out, rather than an exotic ape, they were an archaic population of early people who left Africa and settled in the Caucasus, never having bred with later populations. Story 35. With the way how humans are really weird, I would not be surprised to see human-beast hybrids, werewolves, centaur, minotaur, etc. Story 36. They all have at least a little bit of reality that makes them what they are. Take dragons as an example. While there is no actual dragon, and never was, there was a time when our planet's magnetic poles flipped, which caused auroras to appear all over the globe. To the understanding of the humans that existed at the time, they would definitely appear to be dragons. And while some depictions of dragons have evolved far beyond their original appearance, there is one place in the world where dragons are depicted appearing more like the auroras. In China, their depictions dragons look very similar to the auroras, still to this day. Bright and colorful and randomly wavy. All mythical creatures owe their existence to actual history. So it shouldn't surprise anyone to find out that mythical creatures did, and most definitely still do, exist, even if not what you are currently imagining. Story 37. Wouldn't be surprised if sirens would exist. The ocean is big, and maybe they weren't discovered for a reason. Story 38. Unicorn. It's a horse with a horn. Giraffes seem like the less likely thing to exist. Oh, this long-necked horse cow thing with spots just walks around on these long jerk legs and they fight with their necks. Story 39. If you're putting treats out for the wee folk so that they treat you well and don't play tricks on you, you're putting treats out for the homeless dude who lives in the woods and sometimes walks around the village at night so he doesn't get pissed off and knock over your woodpile or something, who lives under bridges, in the woods, at the edge of town, sometimes in ruined buildings, old tombs, or even caves. The wee folk, who are sometimes just strange and lonely, but sometimes horrific monsters, and homeless people. And you're warning your kids that if they go in the woods and they see what looks like a weird campsite, they shouldn't mess with it, because the wee folk will dislike them forever. Stories of how to treat the wee folk so they don't mess with you are just childhood memories of parental advice of how not to piss off the weird guy in the woods, distorted into myth over generations. Story 40. Fairies. Just for the reason that when I was a kid, I was convinced that there was a colony of fairies that lived under my house. I would love to have a little flying friend. Looking back though, I think the reason why I came up with that was because we had bees living in the ground around our yard, and I'm deathly afraid of bees. So, to calm me down, I told myself it wasn't a hive of bees, but a colony of fairies. And I believe myself. Good job, me. Story 41. Unicorn. Are you telling me in a world with narwhals and rhinos as well as something as wild as the platypus, a horse with a horn is just out of the question? Story 42. Dragons. I heard the theory that they had hollow bones like birds, which would be why we have a mass of legends about them but can't find any fossils, as hollow bones dissolve more readily than solid ones. Story 43. Bigfoot. Because hunters and outdoorsmen can't be misidentifying bears all the time. I'd trust them knowing the difference between Bigfoot and a bear. Story 44. On a serious note, the Loch Ness Monster. Not today OFC, but that baby was around. It's only a matter of time till some funky fossils are found nearby. Story 45. Mermaids. It would make sense once we were evolving some of our human-like apes turned to the sea to fish and live, other than us that turned to the land to hunt. And over time developing a bond, the ocean, and developing features to help them survive that way. Story 46. Kawekawau, a huge species of gecko from New Zealand Maori folklore. Even back when humans first started colonizing NZ, these animals were said to be very elusive even then and were rarely seen. And there has only been one full-on documented report of one ever being seen alive, which is when an English settler watched a Maori chief lift up a log and eliminate one. Nature-wise, New Zealand has always been full of surprises, and new lizard species are still being discovered every year. So Emo, there is one hell of a chance the mythical giant lizard could be out there somewhere, waiting to be properly discovered and described. Even if fossilized remains of it are found, and they went extinct some time ago, it proves that they did exist. Not to mention a big stuffed lizard was found in a French museum and was never identified, which definitely raises the possibility of its existence. Story 47. Bigfoot. Someone in this subreddit talked about the Kraken being a really large squid that people saw, so Bigfoot could easily be the same deal. It could be Gigantopithecus, a prehistoric primate that was said to live in ancient China. Some other fossils from Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia have been found, and could potentially be other types of Gigantopithecus. And if that's the case, then what if there were some in America as well, who survived their extinction for some unknown reason? However, they could be highly endangered, explaining why it's so rare for people to get a sighting. IDK. That's just my theory. Story 48. There have been rumors circulating in the paleontology world for decades about the possibility of giant ground sloths still being extant somewhere in the Amazon rainforest. All the usual suspects are there. Native legends about large, hairy, bad-smelling monsters with huge claws. Possible sightings by B- and C-list European explorers. Modern possible but spurious footprints, scat, hair, etc. However, the thing that sets it apart from the other living fossil cryptids like Nessie and Mokumbembe, at least for me, is there's a lot less time between when giant ground sloths existed and now than between the Cretaceous and now, and B, the eastern South American environment, in which fossilized giant sloth remains have already been found, has at least a few large areas that have undergone only a little environmental change between the Eocene and now. One of the biggest points against, though, is that one of the sloth's most voracious predators, humans, have also been in those same environmentally stable areas for almost the entire period. So, I don't know, still on the fence about them, but I think that statistically, they're the most likely to still be out there. Story 49. Unicorns. A horse with a horn in the middle of its head doesn't sound crazy to me. We do have rhinos after all. Story 50. Probably unicorns. The idea of a horse variant with a horn doesn't seem that far-fetched considering all the other designs the universe has pooped out. Story 51. I used to be skeptical of lizard people, but now, IDK, maybe, I guess. Maybe there are aliens among us. Story 52. Nessie is one of the older mythical creature sightings, the year 565 or thereabouts, so maybe. I'm thinking an Atlantean would be least surprising. The ocean is vast, and recorded history basically started over with the burning of the library at Alexandria. It didn't actually burn but died in a slow decline, starting in 145 BC. Intellectuals were purged from the empire, taking what they could of its vast knowledge with them. There's only one Atlantis reference surviving from a credible ancient source, but it is described as a real place, with strange people and good trade. Would not be. Shocked if there was a type of underwater human. The ocean is crazy deep and we've only mapped portions of the sea floor. Story 53. Aliens? People are getting ready quick because they were always one of main candidates. Also, space is infinite, so it wouldn't be a surprise if there are... Story 54. I reckon Bigfoot since there are so many TV shows about it. Gotta be something there, or some explanation. Story 55. Moose. Running joke with my wife from Maine that has grown to be a somewhat real belief of mine that moose are mythical. Story 56. Unicorns. Think about it, what's more believable? A horse with a horn or a 500-foot leopard moose that eats leaves, in referring to giraffes, or how about hippos, they're basically a living tank. Story 57. Man-bear-pig. They halted a successful animal-pig embryo due to controversy, so why not mix a bear also? Story 58. Dragons. Would make sense as the ultra-rich being lizard men and hoarding riches to the detriment of others. Story 59. Dragons. I know, why wouldn't I be surprised? Well, multiple cultures in the world have some sort of dragon-like creature in their religion. How did they come up with these things without actually seeing them a long time ago when the cultures were created? Story 60. I have to believe narwhals are real. I mean, it is just like a beluga with a horn, not really any different from a unicorn being a horse with a horn, and everyone knows they exist. Story 61. A member of her child Free, who's a complete dingus edit, thanks for the gold kind, stranger. Edit 2. Wow, I didn't imagine this comment would get so popular. Story 62. Unicorn, not flying. Not sure if all unicorns fly or what, but I don't think wings are on the unicorn I'm thinking, since there are horses and narwhals, and at some point there has to have been other weird stuff. Story 63. Wyverns. I mean, they are just reptiles folded bird style. It could have made a lot of sense at some point of evolution. Story 64. Dragon. All it would take would be a pterosaur with some kind of gland that let them spit out caustic flammable material. Story 65. Mermaid sirens, but they look shriveled and uncanny ash and probably live in one of the deepest parts of the ocean that we can't access. Story 66. Unicorns. Seamon. We have literal giraffes and narwhals walking out here, and a horse with a horn still isn't a thing? Story 67. The Chupacabra. It's a blood-sucking creature and vampire bats are real. That or it must be a sick animal that transmitted the disease to its victims, hence the emaciated look. Story 68. For land-based, I don't think they would be alive now, but perhaps previously extinct. Yeti, basilisk, Fenrir hellhounds, cockatrice, wyvern, centaur. Story 69. Those that are just animals that don't break any natural laws or anything. Magical dimension, hopping Bigfoot living in Central Park. Get the fudge out. But some colonies of raptors in the dense African jungles. Sure, why not? Story 70. The Kraken we keep discovering bigger and bigger squid. I wouldn't be surprised if there was one big enough to drag down a ship, not saying one has by any means. Story 71. Loch Ness Monster, no doubt. I'd actually be more surprised if it didn't exist. We've already discovered weirder things living in our oceans. Story 72. 100 Nessie. I've thought so since I was little. I used to say I'd be the first to capture her on camera. That was before I realized I had thalassophobia.